I like watching people die. That's why I give my kicks while others scream and cry. And my friends think that I'm sick or maybe uneducated, and my family doesn't want to admit that they are related. Now monsters and madmen who rape and mutilate are perfect entertainment when I take her on a date. You can shove the spark of vampires and family comedies. Give me blood and beast and boots and take the triple B's. Don't ask me why, 'cause I don't know. Don't close your eyes, enjoy the show. 'Cause I'm a gore, hellbound horror movie lover. I like my voyeurism with a glass of red rum, 'cause I'm a gore, hellbound horror movie lover.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Horror Show. Show dissects, mutilates, dismembers, and butchers all of your favorite and not so favorite horror movies and other cult classics. I'm Sean,
I'm Joe.
and with us to celebrate the third week of March Garris, we'd be remiss to not give the man himself his flowers. We have Mick Garris here with us today on the Horror Show. Hello, Mick. Happy to have you here.
Happy to be here, Sean, Joe. Good to see you.
Nice to see you.
In ways that your audience can't see. So,
So I know not to start off on a bad note, but I know LA's been hit really hard. Are you and your family been all right during this? And I saw some new ones pop up.
everybody is safe and sound at home. Yeah, there have been a couple of new ones pop up today alone, but we're in the future, so who knows what the situation of the world is now.
I forgot.
You said 3 minutes. You made it to a minute, 7 seconds.
Let's not panic our listeners by being like, there's more fires.
No, not in March too. Jesus.
So I'm glad to hear that, though. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, I mean, we're not so lucky. We're luckier than an awful lot of other people.
Yeah.
My brother had to evacuate. He lives in Altadena, and fortunately his home was spared. But just one block away, it's total devastation. So
that's insane.
It's the worst tragedy in Los Angeles history.
Yeah, no, I agree. And even the houses that got spared, I'm hearing like they're going to have to basically be redone also because of all this, the ash and the asbestos and stuff in the air. And
yeah, my brother's house, he said he checked it out, and it is inside is just coated with a half an inch of ash over everything.
That's terrible.
Crazy.
Well, on a brighter note, we are celebrating March Garris. So a few weeks ago, this is
my favorite holiday.
Ours too. Much better than Japanuary, which we finished.
Oh, but that sounds like fun too.
That was okay, but if we had just done Japanese horror movies, we'd be in the clear. Instead, we decided to do the ones that had Japanese and American remakes and do them together. Not the best.
That's so Godzilla aplenty, huh?
Yeah.
I wish we did God. That would make sense. We did the Ring versions, The Grudge.
The Ring, The Grudge, and
Pulse. Yeah.
Well, actually, we did. We actually covered the Godzilla American one from the 90s for an Easter special because there's eggs at the end of it. We also did Critters 2 that year for Easter.
Well, there aren't a whole lot of Easter horror movies, so
no,
I'm glad you were able to dig that one out. Yeah.
Can I ask, have you ever seen Peter Rottentail?
I have not.
We'll have to get you a copy.
I am ignorant of Peter Rottentail. Now I feel like I'm not the historian that people give me credit for being.
Yeah, we did Critters 2, and I forget whether it was Joe or I. It's been so long now. It was like 9 years ago. But we did Critters 2, and one of us came up with the tagline for it that if you ever do a remaster or re-release, I'm giving you our permission to use this. The tagline is, because it's Easter, Passion of the Crites.
I love it. Okay.
It's pretty good.
Time to that's worth doing a re-release just for the tagline.
I agree.
Rather than Critters 2, the main course, Critters 2, Passion of the Krites.
Yeah. So again, producer Lexi put this all together. So thanks to Lexi. And so a few weeks ago, she wanted you on the show so badly, and we kind of had this. Yeah, we kind of had the schedule all laid out, and I was like, well, where can we plug it in? Because we have like February, we're doing found footage movies, and I was like, where can we plug it in? And we had nothing for March, and she was like, what about March Garris? And I was like, that name is insane, but I think that's perfect. And then she gave the green light to book you on for March Garris. So
now we need March Garris t-shirts.
That we can make that happen easily. Yeah. We can make that happen easily. So this month is all about you. And as the listeners,
I don't think I can take that burden.
As the listeners know, Joe and I have each made our picks. Joe has chose Sleepwalkers for his pick. I chose Quicksilver Highway for my pick.
Rare choice, yeah.
Yeah. And Christopher Lloyd is something else than that. I've never seen him in that outfit or haircut ever. Shocking when I saw his name and I was like, oh great, I love Christopher Lloyd. And then I saw him and I was like, no way did he get him in this outfit.
And that was his choice. He helped design that outfit.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, he wanted it. He thought it was sort of a Henry V. So he was doing an Olivier.
Yes, that is awesome.
That's actually
Chris
amazing.
Lloyd, Laurence Olivier, they're often confused. Yeah.
And for the listeners at home, we'll give Mick his choice for his Mick pick at the end of the episode. So Mick can think about that during the course of this finely honed interview. So let's actually get talking about some of the good stuff. So you're a writer, director, producer, and I think as the years are going on, you're really becoming most known, and you had just said this, as this horror historian, almost like one of those like Roman teachers and philosophers, it feels like, where you like collected stories from other philosophers and teachers to pass down to new people. It seems like that's where you kind of landed recently.
It's never been my intent, but I get asked to be in documentaries all the time. And once you've been in enough of them, you become a professional talking head, which is something I've wanted to avoid forever. But it is my passion. I mean, films and television and books and the like have always been favorites of mine, but I never intended to be an academic. When you love something, you learn as much as you can about it. And then doing 7 years of interviews for the podcast Postmortem, which ended a year ago, it just opened up doors to knowledge that you'd have to be a fool not to absorb if you're talking to 200 people, interviewing 200 people. Plus, I was a journalist before I started any of this. I wrote for Cine Fantastique and Fangoria and Starlog back in my early years. And then I did TV interviews for the Z Channel here in Los Angeles, where I interviewed people like Carpenter and Spielberg and Tobe Hooper and all those. So if you can't absorb knowledge by osmosis when you're exposed to that, then there's something wrong with you. But I think as my hair has gotten lighter, I am a natural blonde now. People tend to project knowledge onto experience, and they're not necessarily the same thing, but people give me credit for more academia than I really deserve.
I mean, I think it's a perfect role for you. It seemed like such a natural transition. I've watched a lot of the post-mortem interviews, and they're really good. And what you extract from them is almost, it's sort of what, I don't know how to explain it. You're asking questions that kind of seem obvious to somebody. Like, yeah, of course you would ask that, but no one asks these people that, or no one has the access to them. So I think it's a perfect role for you, and you have this access, and it's amazing to get to hear it from them.
Well, thank you. But it's always been my side gig. I'm still writing, I'm still producing, I'm still directing. I haven't done the directing thing in a while, but there's projects in development all the time. And I've always been primarily a storyteller, but I really feel comfortable in the role of interviewer because I equate myself with an audience, and my curiosity is such that I think I know what other people want to know, and I can approach it from within rather than from without. So having access to all these people I've worked with, and once the show got going for a while and we'd had Stephen King and Clive Barker and all of these people, John Carpenter and everybody, then even more of them made themselves available to me who I may not have had a relationship with. So it was really a lot of fun. But my interviewing goes back to those Z Channel interviews were in 1979, 1980, 1981. So it goes back.
That's really cool. Yeah, I mean, it shows. You've got the chops there for sure.
Thank you. Because turning it over to a new generation with you guys. Yeah.
I think we'd be remiss if we didn't mention for postmortem, we grew up with your producer Joe.
Producer Joe Russo,
Chester, Connecticut. Yeah, himself.
It is a small world, but I wouldn't want to paint it, as Stephen Wright said.
Yeah, so it was wild when I found that out when Joe was out there. It was really cool. I was like, fuck.
Are you guys still in Connecticut?
Yes, we're still in Connecticut.
Yeah. Okay.
We didn't make it out there like Joe Russo did.
Yeah. Not yet.
Not yet. I do love it there. So you have postmortem, and producer Lexi actually was the one that clued me in on this. I don't know whether these came before postmortem or after. You have these Master of Horror dinners or events.
Yeah.
Did that play into this at all? Was that before, or did that?
It was well before.
Okay.
It was really what gave birth to the Masters of Horror TV series.
Okay.
We filmmakers within the genre, we run into each other at Directors Guild events or at conventions or film festivals around the world. And there would always be we all ought to have dinner together sometime. Wouldn't it be great to do that? And it's like, for years that would go on. And finally I thought, it's a great idea, but nobody's ever going to do this. So if I don't do it, it's never going to get done. And I spent like a week trying to work out a time where we could get maybe a dozen filmmakers together. We finally did it. It was Guillermo del Toro. It was John Carpenter. It was John Landis, Toby Hooper, Stuart Gordon. There were a dozen of us. And it was so much fun. And the group was given its name by Guillermo del Toro. We were at a restaurant in the San Fernando Valley, and next to us was a party having a birthday. And so we sang Happy Birthday with them. They had no idea who we were and who would. But at the very end, Guillermo stands up and says, "The Masters of Horror wish you a happy birthday." And so we were suddenly the Masters of Horror, tongue firmly planted in cheek. And then the next time I tried to set up the second dinner, it took me 1 hour to do it rather than the week it took to do the first time, because everybody had a great time. You know, it was these amazing people, and nobody ever sets things up like that, you know, but it's just a bunch of people who had the same job doing it. And every time we did it, more and more filmmakers would come, until the last one we did, which was well before the pandemic. We had 35 filmmakers show up. And it was mainly, I mean, there were more every time, but this was kind of a farewell to Toby Hooper, who had recently passed. And so everybody wanted to show up and honor him in that regard.
That's amazing.
Awesome.
That's so cool. That's so
Yeah.
cool.
Do you have?
Did you,
Sorry, but do you have a personal favorite Masters of Horror episode?
You know, I love them all because everybody is working the way they want to. Nobody's following, you know, if you work on a series, you're just assigned a date and you don't choose your script. In this case, they either wrote their own scripts, they worked with a writer that they liked, they chose from a batch of scripts, and everybody made, you know, John Carpenter made John Carpenter movies. John Landis made John Landis movies. Tobe Hooper made Tobe Hooper movies. And so I love them all for that. But in a way, my favorites, I love that we got Dario Argento to come over from Rome to direct in Vancouver. And I love that we went to Tokyo to do episodes in Japan. So, yeah, with Takashi Miike and another Japanese director whose name fell out of my brain just now, but it'll come back. Naruda-san, yeah. And his first name I'm blanking on, but I called him Naruda-san, so that's good enough.
the Argento episode is the standout for me.
Yeah.
For sure. That one just well, I think he had two, but the Jennifer.
Yeah, Jennifer, the first one, which starred Steven Weber, who was my Jack Torrance in The Shining.
Yes.
He also wrote the episode based on a comic strip from Creepy magazine.
Oh.
So he wrote the screenplay, and then when Dario was going to direct, he was just in heaven because Weber is a huge genre fan and very knowledgeable about it. And then Argento, who didn't really understand the humor in it, started yanking out all of the humor that Steven had put in. He's going, my script. But Argento. So.
And you did a lot with Steven Weber too. You guys collaborated pretty frequently.
I love Weber. He's a great guy. He was a great Jack Torrance, and we only got him 3 days before we started shooting the show because nobody wanted to step into Jack Nicholson's shoes. And Weber is a fearless actor. Then we did Jennifer with him. We did Desperation with him. And I just think the world of him. Such a hugely talented guy. People know him for being funny, but he's so versatile and such a great dramatic actor. And not enough people have seen that side of him.
Yeah, we just did a few, I don't even know now. Maybe it's been months. I don't even know. We just did, though, the Shining miniseries. And that was something as a kid when that came out. It blew my mind. But I was a huge Steven Weber fan from Wings.
A show that to this day I've never seen.
It's very good. It's very good. It's a little I don't, in 2025 standards, it does some weird stuff, but overall it's still very funny. But I just remember I loved it as a kid. I loved Wings and I loved Steven Weber specifically. And then The Shining came out and I was like, whoa, it blew my mind that Steven Weber could do that.
Talented. He's so talented. He can do anything. You know, I think the world of him, and he's a really good guy. Not every talented human being is also a decent human being.
Yeah.
But he's one of the great ones.
Yeah. I actually, this question actually comes up a few times in my notes that I wanted to talk to you about, but you mentioned that the television having people come in to direct an episode where it's usually a different script writer or you're just handed something. Tales from the Crypt always, and just to me, it was not based on any knowledge I had. I've been watching it since I was a kid. I love it. It always felt to me as if directors that they got for those episodes, they had a lot of freedom. But then when I started looking into it more with your episode specifically, Whirlpool, I noticed it was A.L. Katz and Gilbert Adler that wrote it. And then I just started thinking, I was like, wait, how much say did they have in Tales from the Crypt?
Well, sometimes you get to choose from a number of scripts on Tales from the Crypt, but normally they try to assign something that they thought was appropriate for the director. And I had known Gil Adler for years before that. We almost made a movie together. We were both working for the same producer. He produced a movie that I was not involved with, and this other executive producer um, was going to produce a movie that I was going to direct that never got made. So I'd known Gil for years, and they brought the script to me. And I actually had some creative input into it. The main thing I did was change the two lead characters. I changed the male character to the female character and vice versa. So suddenly Rita Rudner is the nebbishy cartoonist for EC Comics, and Richard Lewis is the boss, and then it gets reversed, and so we were able to play with gender issues in that way. And I said it in the 1950s when EC Comics were actually a going concern rather than in the 1980s when it was made. So those were some pretty big steps that you don't normally get to do in series television. But anthological television is a lot different from series TV, although stylistically, Tales from the Crypt really was the boobs and blood show. And you could tell you were watching an episode from Tales from the Crypt, whereas in Masters of Horror, we tried to make it so each show reflected the director's sensibilities rather than the producer's.
Yeah, that's interesting. And HBO was so young at the time. It was not the powerhouse it was.
Yeah, but always a lot bigger than Showtime was.
Yeah. But so, that episode's super fun. The meta levels of it being the Tales from the Crypt comic room, that was really cool. And you had to work with Richard Lewis, which
Richard Lewis and Rita Rudner, two comedians,
yeah,
the whole idea of casting comedians in the two lead roles. And there was another comedian who's the killer in the opening splash panels.
Yes,
Blake. Okay, I'm messing up with names, but forgive me 40 years later.
I don't think anyone's going to hold it against you.
But yeah,
sorry. Did you, as the director, have freedom in choosing like who you wanted to play those parts, bringing in those comedians?
Absolutely, as long as everybody was in agreement. If everybody thought it was a good idea, then they were 100% supportive. But they would sometimes give you suggestions and, oh, maybe that's a good idea. But the idea of casting comedians was one that they went along with, as well as the change in period and the change of gender in the roles. So we could shake things up a little bit. And it was really the first, other than Critters 2, was much more, well, it was the 90s, not the 80s. So it was much more comedic than a lot of them had humor to them, kind of the corny Crypt Keeper bad joke on humor, but the stories were normally more horrific. This one did not shy away from the comedic aspects of having two comics in the leading roles.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true on that. Sleepwalkers actually is interesting because we just watched it. That also has oh wait, I'm gonna go on a tangent for a second. So I just want to say, as usual, Sleepwalkers, The Stand, in particularly those two, but also The Shining, were like building blocks of my childhood. Those I'm movies
so sorry.
I can tell you, I can remember. I remember my dad went to the movies to see Sleepwalkers and came back, and for whatever reason, I was entirely too young. He was telling me about the corkscrew scene and the cat's hanging from the trees. And I was like, what? Like, I cannot wait to be an adult so I can see this. I need to see what he's talking about. And that was burned into my memory for years until I was finally able to see it. And
interesting, those were the elements that he remembered.
Yeah. He came home and was just like, you won't believe what I just saw. And then just
and your mom didn't go with him, I'm sure.
I don't know, honestly, but he just came home telling me this. And I was like, and he's like, well, you can't watch it, but I'm going to tell you the two probably most graphic things about the movie right now. And good luck.
Two most graphic things he could tell you about.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. You won't believe what this mother and son do.
Yeah, it's the first part in my motherfucker trilogy. We have yet to make the third, but no, it's the second part of the trilogy.
Wait, what's the
first four?
Oh, well, is the third one coming up? Do we have any news on that?
We have motherfucker May, so we can.
Motherfucker May, right?
Look at those.
I'll have to be back for that one. There is no plan at this time for a third element, but one never knows. Yeah. I never close the door to ending a trilogy on a high note.
Absolutely. Yeah. So Joe, you have Joe chose Sleepwalkers as his movie. Do you have any?
Yeah. On the topic of Sleepwalkers, I'd read that Stephen King specifically asked for you to take over Rupert Wainwright on this after seeing your work on Psycho 4. What was that?
I didn't know that it was public knowledge that it was Rupert Wainwright, but I guess it is. So I guess we can talk about that.
Well, breaking news then on the horror stuff. I was just curious what that initial conversation was like coming from Stephen.
Well, originally, I met with the studio executives at Columbia, and they said the meeting went great. And they said, you've got the job, but we have to meet with another director because his agent is a friend of ours that we deal with, and we owe them the courtesy of meeting with their client. And so the next day they met with the other client, and it was Rupert Wainwright, and they gave him the job. So I was surprised to find out that the job, they said, yeah, we're sure you've got it, but we just have to meet this other guy. Well, they gave it to the other guy. But apparently this other director with the initials RW started rewriting King's script, King's original screenplay, which was not based on a book or any pre-existing material or intellectual property or IP. He came up with a planet of sleepwalkers and just completely throwing out everything that King had done. Now, if you're Columbia Pictures and you're going to release a Stephen King movie and you want Stephen King's name in the title, it better be based on Stephen King's script. So a couple months later, I get a call and they want to have lunch with me at Columbia again. I thought, wow, I thought this was a dead issue. And they called me up and we had a great lunch and we're talking about it. And after the lunch, they said, okay, so let me take you to your office. And they moved me into the production office and started me working on the film that day. I had no idea they were giving me the job. And obviously they had changed horses because they were afraid of Wainwright's changes alienating Stephen King. And because I'm a writer as well as a director and was a huge Stephen King fan, they felt confident that I could put King's material back into place while addressing the notes that they had for the script. And so it all worked out in that way. And the movie became the #1 movie at the box office when it opened. And it's still with us. It became one of those movies that wouldn't die. So, although many critics at the period were hoping it would. So.
Oh man, the critics are rough on you. I was going through.
Yeah, it's what's weird is I was born in LA, and my hometown paper is the LA Times. Everything I've ever made has gotten a shitty review in the LA Times, including things that have gotten good reviews elsewhere. Like The Shining was the first ever 10 out of 10 that TV Guide made. Not in the LA Times. Even The Stand got a bad review. Critters 2, all the reviewer would do would mention how terrible it was that more people would go see Critters 2 than the new Antonioni film, which, by the way, turned out to not be true when Critters 2 came out. But it's very weird. And, I respect people having their opinions. And when they're paid to have an opinion, if you don't like what I do, I'm sorry. I do the best that I can and try and do really good work and hopefully work that stands on its own. But I can't control how much you like or don't like something I make. All I can do is the best work that I can do with the material I have or with the material I create. But yeah, critics have not been particularly friendly. But over the years, these projects, which died in their inception, like Hocus Pocus, like Critters 2, and even though Sleepwalkers was number one for the first week, it faded quickly. All of those movies have a shelf life that no one ever anticipated, particularly Hocus Pocus. The Stand became the biggest rated miniseries in history. It had the most viewers of any miniseries ever, and it went up each of the 4 nights. So there is some feeling of valedictory in that regard. But yeah, everybody wants to get good reviews. Whether you get them or not is not up to you. It's up to Providence.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I could not believe some of the reviews I was reading, especially for The Shining and The Stand, which The Stand, as I mentioned, like blew my hair back as a kid, because I remember my dad's The Stand book with like the 2 weird knights fighting and these like cone masks. It was this old, like first edition book. He was such a big Stephen King fan, my dad. And then the movie comes out, and Trash Can Man, like your interpretation of Trash Can Man,
Matt Frewer,
captured my imagination. Like I was just like, this character is incredible.
And Matt was the first actor who read for us for any role. And King was in the room, and our casting director and our producer and myself, and Matt came in, and you'd expect him to play the crazy, but he played the heartfelt. My Life for You, that scene where he first meets Randall Flagg and he holds up the flame for him. And he's practically bringing you he was bringing us to tears. And that was the last thing we expect. And it's like, before Matt left the room, it's like, you're hired. We want you. And now Matt is my good luck charm. I work with him as much as I can.
He's great. He's a staple of those 90s movies.
Oh, I love him to death. He's a really good friend and just an amazing, amazing actor.
Rob Lowe was great in that too, actually.
Yeah. And that was something they originally wanted him for the Larry Underwood part, the rock and roll star, because he's Mr. Handsome and beautiful. And I said, I like the idea, but let's cast him as Nick Andrews because it's much more unexpected. And Rob loved the idea. Rob is a huge Stephen King fan. So that worked out great. He was really great as Nick Andrews.
That's awesome. Now, was that, going back to Sleepwalkers, was that your first interaction with Stephen King? Because I take it you guys are pretty close now. Yeah, you've done a lot.
Yeah, it was the first time we worked together, and he was so happy. When it was done, I flew to New York to show it to him at the Magno screening room in Manhattan. And he came in from Maine to see the film. It was just me, him, and his wife, Tabby, in a room together. And he's screaming and laughing and howling in all the right places. And it was like, I have never had a screening like this without there being 1,000 people in the theater. And it was amazing. And he just loved it. He didn't want any changes. The studio forced me to make some changes, and mainly to get the rating. We had to go back 5 times to get the ratings, or 8 times or something. And they said, if you have to go back one more time, forget it. We are cutting it instead of you. So we got our R rating. Yeah, it was the first time I worked with him, and he loved it so much that he asked me to do The Stand. And it was the best job I ever took. I mean, the friendship with King has been a very long-lasting one. We've worked together so many times, and I've got another King project that's in the hopper that we'll see if it happens or not, but we're pretty close to having our deal made.
Nice.
So we'll see. It's been a long time since we've done something together, and it would be great if we can pull that off.
I hope so.
Me too. There's nothing better than working with Stephen King.
I can't even imagine. That's just like mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing that we're talking to you and you've worked with him. And I remember one time I met Ric Flair, the wrestler, and I shook his hand. And I remember, more than meeting him, I was like, this hand has like punched or whatever, punched like some of the most famous people in the world, like all these pro wrestlers. I was like, that's kind of insane. And I started thinking about that with you tonight. I was like, oh my God, it's amazing to talk to Mick, but it's also like this weird thing where he's going to dinner with these people. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I'm definitely the Zelig of horror. The Forrest Gump of horror, the little out of focus guy in the background of the black and white photo of all the other famous people.
I like the Forrest Gump of horror.
On the topic of The Stand, I'm a huge Do the Right Thing fan. I just was curious, was it intentional to reunite Ossie Davis and Ruby Dee?
Well, they had been, they were husband and wife for years, for decades before they made Do the Right Thing. And they were both huge Broadway stars in the 50s and 60s, and black theater. They were activists, African-American activists for years, had done movies, television, Broadway, just icons of every medium, entertainment medium. And it was such an honor. But originally, I thought, they're cast together so much that maybe we shouldn't do that. Let's just hire Ruby, who was so amazing from Mother Abigail. I mean, she just, every time I look at her, when I finally would see her out of makeup, which I almost never did because she'd come to the set made up, it was like, oh my God, she's this youthful, beautiful woman, not this 108-year-old woman who bakes her own bread. So we originally hired Moses Gunn to play the judge, and another iconic black actor, really fantastic actor, but he got sick during production with a really bad flu. So we brought in Ossie to take over, and within a month of The Stand wrapping, Moses Gunn passed away. So it was like we should have just hired Ossie the way we were going to originally before going. They don't want to be cast together, everything they do they? And in this case, it was just so great. I mean, I've been so lucky to work with true legends of stage and screen, like they say. Yeah.
That's wild.
That's great.
That's super cool. So we talked about The Stand. So when you're making miniseries for television, what The Stand, I mean, and The Shining seemed like they were pretty bold for the period of television, and television was so restricted. How hard was that? Like, how much interference did you get on those miniseries?
There was definitely interference from the standards and practices, but what the network told us was people know what they're getting when Stephen King's name is in the title.
Yeah.
So we were able to really expand the boundaries of taste in broadcast television. Broadcast standards, one of the first notes was don't show any open eyes on the stand of dead people. And so our middle finger to the network was in the opening titles. There's actually a camera that goes right into a woman who's lying there dead with her eyes open and they're clouding over, and we just push the Steadicam right into her face during the opening title. So it's like, okay, we're not in Oz anymore, not in Kansas anymore. Can't even get my references straight here.
Yeah, listen, I can't either. I also just rewatched The Wizard of Oz.
Stop it.
Not holding up for you anymore?
Not for me. I don't know. I don't see it.
No, you prefer Wicked, right?
I still haven't seen that one.
I am not planning to.
I'm not either. It's funny because I think as I've gotten older, there was definitely a period in my life where I was like, I need to see every big movie that gets released this year, and I have to see it. And now it's just like, do I? I don't think I really. I know it's not for me. You know?
Yeah. And big movies have gotten a lot less interesting because they're going for a very specific, a non-specific audience. They want the broadest audience they can get.
Yeah.
And you can't really do interesting work if you're trying to reach everybody.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought on that. So this is I did not realize that your wife played Lorraine Massey in The Shining.
Cynthia Garris playing the woman in 217.
That is a wild. I mean, I assume you made that choice.
Oh yeah. No, the casting director said, "We've got this actress you might know." No. Yeah, that was something that she was also raised. She loved horror movies through childhood. It's one of the things that bonded us from when we met. And she was a big fan of Famous Monsters. And one of her greatest accomplishments is that she made the cover of Fangoria as the woman in 217.
Oh.
So, yeah, it was
so
really great. And the makeup won an Emmy. It was done by Billy Corso, who has won Oscars since then, and just really, really fantastic. And she's great in the part. Yeah. You see what she looks like when she's committing suicide early on.
Yes, yeah.
Before she rots in the tub. Yeah.
Yeah. That must have been the one plus. I just can't imagine coming home being like, honey, I've got a role for you. You'll never guess.
I've killed her in a lot of my movies.
No, so what I thought about that and I was like, wow, that's crazy. Clicked on her IMDb. Do you know what your wife's IMDb photo looks like?
I'm not sure which one it is.
I'm gonna have to share this with you because it took me by surprise when I clicked on it. I'll bring it up on the screen real fast. She is
yes,
Zanti.
Zanti from Critters 2.
Zanti from Critters 2.
So I normally just tell people, but she's got a great personality.
I could not. I was dying when I saw that. I was like, I clicked IMDb. I'm like, all right, let's check it out. And then that popped up, and I was like, oh my god.
Well,
so she
neither of
Zanti
us
also.
put it up there for sure. Yeah. She's a beautiful woman.
Yeah, no, she absolutely is. And she played Zanti, I presume, or else. Okay.
Yeah, that's her. Under tons of makeup that was really difficult. Christopher Biggs, the makeup effects artist, had her in a rig that had her arms strapped to her body. She couldn't move them. She had this giant rubber head on that she couldn't. There were no air holes for her nostrils. They were just covered up, and we had to put slits in there to open it up so she could breathe. There were silver balls put over the eye sockets so she couldn't see out of it. So it was one of the worst costumes in terms of comfort for the actor that I've ever seen in my life. And had I known that's what it was going to be like on the set, we would not have needed the Valium that day. So.
Yeah, that was that seems intense. So she got to play The Woman in 217 and an alien.
And
so.
Zanti. Yeah. And
Yeah.
she's Susan Stern in The Stand.
Yes.
There's a lot of Sterns and Stans there. Susan Stern in The Stand. Say that 3 times.
On the topic of Critters too, how did that come about? How were you approached to direct a sequel to Critters?
I think it was because I had been working on Amazing Stories, and Critters, the original Critters, was very Spielbergian. And I think they wanted some of that stardust to rub off, the Spielberg stardust to rub off on Critters 2. They knew I was a writer as well as a director. I'd been writing for Steven Spielberg for Amazing Stories. I had directed an episode, so I'd finally gotten some professional experience under my belt. And I met with them. We had a great meeting. My intent was never that my first feature as a director would be a sequel to a low-budget ripoff of Gremlins. But you take opportunities where you find them, and I ended up loving what it could be and putting all of my heart and soul into that. And, getting the job. Bob Shea gave me my first feature as a director. And I will always be in his debt for that. And, I treated it as if it were To Kill a Mockingbird. It was a funny version of To Kill a Mockingbird, but it's really my only, other than Quicksilver Highway, my only truly comedic film that doesn't hide the comedy, or just everything I do has a sense of humor, but that's the only one that's flat out comedic. But we also treat the horror with respect as well, try and make the scary stuff scary, the funny stuff funny, because horror comedies are normally pretty dire. They're neither scary nor funny. They cancel each other out. So trying to walk that line to be an American Werewolf or The Howling or something along those lines, it's difficult to do unless you really commit to it and care about it. And so that's what it's, I think, why Critters 2 failed when it first came out. Literally nobody went and saw it. But now at Easter time, people show it in theaters all the time. It shows in festivals around the world all the time. It's much more popular now than it ever was, which isn't difficult to be, because I went opening night to my local theater up at Universal City Walk, and there were 2 people in the audience. And it was like, oh God,
no.
Kill me now.
My wife and I watch it every Easter. It's a must watch.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Now, so because Critters was pretty successful, I never really pegged it. I've seen people say it's like a ripoff of Gremlins and stuff. I don't know. Maybe I was younger. I always just really liked Critters, and Critters 1 did really well. Did the studio seem invested in 2, or were they more like just
Critters 1 cost $2 million and it grossed $10 million. $10 million is a flop for a studio movie, but for an independent movie, that was very successful.
Okay.
Critters 2 cost $4 million and grossed maybe $1 million or $2 million. So that's a big loss for an independent movie. And, I say it very glibly that it's a ripoff of Gremlins. They're very different. And the people who made the original Critters say how it was written well before Gremlins was ever out and all of that. And I believe them. And we just tried to have as much fun as possible with the whole concept of little fur balls with teeth,
Yeah, I mean, I think you moved it in the right direction. I think that was the direction Critters needed to move to, because where else can you go with Critters?
Well, they did 3 and 4, and then they did the shorts, the AT&T Critters series, and 3 and 4 were written by a very talented writer named David Scow, but they weren't made by David Scow, and they were made direct to video back to back, and they did not succeed at all. Whereas Critters 2 found its audience on home video and became a big success on home video after a terrible flop in theaters.
The video industry at that time was so interesting because it felt like if it went at that time, which is so funny because now it seems like everything's just direct to video now, but it's fine. But I remember at the time it was like if it went direct to video, it was like that's not so great. But I loved that the movies that would flop in the theaters would find a second life on a home video, and that was always a really cool thing.
Thank God for home video, according to Critters 2, and Fly 2 was also #1 movie when it came out, but home video, I got these big checks a few months after it came out in home video, and it's like, what? Because nobody thinks of Fly 2 as being a big success, but boy, home video more successful than theatrical.
Yeah.
And Critters 2 certainly had no success in the theaters, but it was a godsend. And at the time, you could have miniseries come out on home video, like The Stand and The Shining, and be big successes on home video. Not so much these days. They just go to the streaming, Paramount Plus or Peacock or whatever that the network was. They go to their streaming service.
Yeah, I was gonna bring this up when we were talking about The Stand. I vividly remember the giant 3 or 4 VHS box for The Stand. Yes. Joe and I were at the same video store, so it sat on top of the horror section. It wasn't on the shelf. It was on top because the shelf wasn't like thick enough for it.
Oh, good.
Yeah, so it stood out always for me, and I think you paid double because it was like $2.75 for a movie, and then if you got The Stand, it was like $5. And I was always like, if I had a little extra cash as a kid, I was like, we're doing The Stand again, everyone.
Because The Stand is actually 4 hours. 4 movies. Yeah. It's 6 hours long.
Bringing that to a sleepover is like one of the craziest things. My friends.
Well, last year I had the best experience. The American Cinematheque got a DCP made up of The Stand, and it was shown on the big screen at the Cinematheque, all 6 hours, all in one day. And it was a huge success. And I'd never seen it that way. And I watched, Mike Flanagan and I sat next to each other and watched the whole thing because he did the Q&A with me afterwards.
That's cool.
And it was an amazing experience. I was shocked at how theatrical, how cinematic the whole thing was. Because I wasn't somebody who watched a lot of television, so I was utilizing hopefully more cinematic theatrical terms than I was used to doing television, where everybody shoots close up, reverse, master, close up, reverse, master, close up, reverse.
Yeah. I just rewatched it probably a year, maybe it's 2 years now. I rewatched it not in one sitting, but pretty close because I wanted to watch yours, and then I watched the new
the 2020 version.
The 2020 version. Do you have thoughts on the 2020 version?
I was very supportive of it. I have a cameo in it.
Yeah.
And I wanted to be really supportive of Josh Boone, who's a really great guy and a big fan of it. It's not up to me to have an opinion on it. I think there is a fatal mistake that was made in that it's a quest. You're going from A to Z. You're going from the beginning of the quest to the end of the quest and picking up characters and storylines along the way. And they chose to tell it out of order.
Yeah.
And I think that's a fatal mistake on a story that is intended to be a quest. And Josh told me it was because, well, we'd done it that way. So what was the point of doing a new version? A new version that costs 4 times as much, by the way, as ours cost. And yet ours shot in 9 states. Theirs shot in British Columbia only and without a lot of location work. But, they did their version, and Stephen King wrote an additional act The last part, he wrote the script himself, and it was not from the book. It was all original. So they had that, which was my favorite part of the whole show.
Yeah.
But I couldn't get over that creative choice to tell the story inside out, because I just didn't think you could build the momentum of the story that way.
I never put that together. That I knew there was something I didn't love about like the disjointedness of it, but now that you're saying that makes a lot of sense. That's 100% where I kind of stood on it. Because watching yours, it really is this linear thing of the character picking up these other people, and then you get their story. You get their story as they come along for this ride with you, and you're like, oh, like that. It is this like epic. I mean, not comparing it to this, but it's like Lord of the Rings, sort of. Like if you disjointed Lord of the Rings, it would be insane. But it follows this path of like Frodo, right? And it's just like these people along the way that he meets. And in an epic, that's what you kind of need.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the way the book was written. It's the way King wrote the screenplay himself. And it's the way we shot it. And it was an amazing experience. I'd never done anything of any scope before that. And here, suddenly, my biggest movie is Critters 2 in size, in production. Yeah. And suddenly I'm shooting 600 extras in downtown Las Vegas and all of these, 126 speaking parts in 6 states, 195 scripted locations. It was just, we're running and gunning throughout the whole thing. It was impossible to make, but somehow we got through it without anybody dying. So,
yeah, it's impressive. Yeah,
yeah, definitely a plus.
So Joe had a question about, we're not gonna, Hocus Pocus, you kind of talked about it a little bit, but I know Joe had a very important question.
Yeah, a very important one. I'm dying to ask you. The term yabas is my favorite term to describe breasts ever. And did you coin that? Was that part of your original script?
I did not. I would love to take credit for it. There have been other people who have said similar things. It's a great word, but it is not mine. It was probably Neil Cuthbert who added. He came in to do a comedy polish after me. But after the two of us, there were another 10 writers who worked on it. Oh, wow. So you can tell whose material was most used because of how the credits are given. So I've got first position as well as shared story with the producer, David Kirshner. We worked on it together. And then Neil Cuthbert and none of the other writers were credited on that. So it goes to the Writers Guild Arbitration Board, where they are screenwriters who get copies of all the drafts of the script, but none of them have the names on them. It's writer A, writer B, writer C, writer D, and then they vote on the credit should be given to story by writer A and B, screenplay by writer B and C, that sort of thing. So
that's so interesting. I didn't know that.
The movie didn't get made until 8 years after I wrote my drafts.
How much of it is you, do you feel like?
Enough for me to get 3 credits.
Were you happy with how it came out? Like, were you like, okay, I'm glad my name's attached to this thing that kind of got more?
When I first saw it was a little more broad in its comedy than what I had seen. And I had written it for 12-year-olds rather than 16-year-olds because I thought that's what Halloween is really all about. You don't go out trick-or-treating and Halloweening at 16. You're partying and getting drunk if you can. Not that I did. I've never had a drink in my life, but in that case. So when I first saw it, I thought, God, I don't know. But then it was like, boy, this really is good. My wife loves this movie, and everybody's wife loves Hocus Pocus.
Yeah, it's
I was
true.
just about to make the same comment. Like, everyone's wife loves Hocus Pocus. It's true.
And so, yeah, I'm very happy with the movie. It's thrilling to see every year even more people watch it. It's on Freeform every night for 30 days of October. Kids are wearing Halloween costumes as the Sanderson sisters and all of that stuff. So it's it's not the most Mick Garris of my work in that it is so family friendly, but people forget that that's how I started out, with amazing stories, with batteries not included, with Hocus Pocus. It's the 12-year-old in me will never die. And even though Stephen King allowed me to grow up a little older, the teenager in me will never die either. So thank you, Steve.
That's really cool. Did you? So you started out kind of more in the science fiction realm, really, with those stories, or no?
Not so much science fiction, but not
Okay.
so much horror. More fantastic.
Okay.
The amazing stories were fantasy stories. They were set mostly in a real world that were just one step into the supernatural or the otherworldly, or that, and even Batteries Not Included was about little flying saucers, but they were little flying saucers that were living creatures here on Earth in New York. And it wasn't hardware like science fiction movies mostly are. It wasn't Dune. It wasn't Star Wars. It wasn't 2001. So it was more fantasy than science fiction, and then always an element of horror. The first award I ever got was for an episode I wrote of Amazing Stories called The Amazing Fallsworth, which is the darkest episode of Amazing Stories ever. And Stephen and I got an Edgar Award for that from the Mystery Writers of America. Oh, it's hiding back there. You can't see it.
I just saw your awards. Certified Fresh Award.
Oh, yeah, that's for Nightmare Cinema.
Oh, that's awesome.
Nice.
That's awesome. So we'll probably start wrapping this up soon, but is there anyone that you haven't worked with that you'd really want to work with?
Yeah, I mean, there were certainly people that we wanted to work with on Masters of Horror that the timing didn't work out. Wes Craven was going to do one. George Romero was going to do one. We came very close with both of them. I would love to have worked with them. I was friends with them. We knew each other, but we never got to work together. And there are international filmmakers that I'm really a fan of. I love The Substance. Coralie Fargia, who wrote and directed The Substance, who just got nominated for director as well as Best Picture. Sean Baker, who did Honora, also, both of them were on the podcast. And I'm huge fans of both. I would love to have been making Masters of Horror and get Coralie or Sean to come on. Even though Sean is not a genre filmmaker, he knows the genre inside and out. And I would love to work with people like that. But
that would be cool.
That's one thing about being a writer-director and having worked with people like Spielberg and Stephen King and Clive Barker and John Carpenter and Tobe Hooper, is like, I think I better count my blessings. I don't need to expand that base. It might go wrong.
That's really cool. Oh shoot, what was I going to ask?
And by the way, Cynthia is also in Quicksilver Highway.
Oh, is she?
She plays Dr. George's wife.
In the first segment?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. That's crazy.
Where he pulls her into the bathroom.
She's great.
That's her.
She's great. That's funny. the woman that directed, I forget her name now. Sorry, the woman that directed The Substance. What's her name? Coralie?
Yeah, Coralie Fargia. Yeah.
Did you watch her other movie, Revenge?
That's how I got to know her. I saw that movie, it blew me away, and I tracked her down, and we did a Zoom interview from Paris because it's one of the best first features I've ever seen in my life. It's so well directed. It's so good. She is brilliant. And I just think the world of her. And she's a great person as well. And anybody who hasn't seen Revenge, if you've got Shudder, I think it's still on Shudder. And it's a great film.
That movie is so crazy. And I remember it, and The Substance did the exact same thing. And that's when I looked her up to be like, who is this? And I was like, this makes all the sense in the world. And it was once some fight choreography started, I was like, wait, who directed this? Like, this is wild, because who would put this in here? And then as soon as I saw Revenge, I was like, this makes all the sense in the world, because she has now 2 movies where these women fight like superheroes.
Yeah, she's great.
They're going through walls and just getting up, and they're just covered in, and you're like, she expands, and she doesn't make it so grounded where everything has to be very serious. Like, the fight scenes are nuts. It's wild.
Well, even though we don't do the podcast anymore, they're still available. They're still up, and you should track down the interview with her. It's really terrific. It's all about revenge, and it's a great conversation.
Yeah, no, I would love to talk to her, because I think she's I feel like it would be so
now
interesting.
that she's been nominated.
I know. Now it's not a chance. Should have done it after Revenge. One day, maybe.
Yeah.
All right. We have these rapid fire questions that we're introducing. They're easy. Okay. But Joe, did you want to ask a question with about Stephen King? I thought.
Oh, that was going to be part of the rapid fire.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So that'll be part of the rapid fire. Okay. Here we go. Rapid fire. It doesn't have to be rapid. I won't shut up half the time, so it's fine. All right, rapid fire. Zombies, vampires, or werewolves?
Something new. Yeah, I could live without ever seeing another vampire, zombie, or werewolf movie, even though Werewolves Within was terrific, and something like One Cut of the Dead is an amazing zombie movie, and there are great vampire movies all the time, but I think Nosferatu is proof that story's been told enough.
Yeah, I agree. I tend to agree with you. Wait, did you, one of the things I always say, I've been fighting about this to myself, really. I don't have anyone to fight about with it. But one thing I've always been, like, speaking of new, is these monster movies. When people make these like large monster movies, they always make them slimy and reptilian. Bring back the furry giant monster. Like, what's wrong with a furry monster?
Yeah, damn it.
Yeah.
That is a hill.
The crawling eye was a perfect monster.
Now there we go. Well, that was a little slimy. Yeah.
That's true. Yeah.
All right.
Favorite horror movie snack?
Well, popcorn goes with everything. So I hate to be so mundane in my answer, but that's the favorite, any kind of movie snack.
It's the right choice.
Do you ever
you can dump in M&Ms in there?
That's what I was going to ask. I was going to ask if you're a candy dumper.
Yeah, I'm not. I tried it once, and they all go to the bottom, and then they get covered in butter, and or
that's my issue with it. It's not like you don't go in for a handful and get everything. You just get popcorn.
You just get popcorn, and then at the bottom you get a bunch of buttery M&Ms.
I agree with you. Most overrated horror trope?
All of them.
Well, I guess that's what makes them a trope.
No, let's try and choose one. The cat scare.
Oh, okay. I like that. The cat that jumps out and lands.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, it was only a cat. Yeah.
It's always a
choice.
cat for some reason.
I know you have one in the works, but what's a Stephen King work that hasn't been adapted yet that should be?
Holly, the last book in the Holly series.
Did you
Like it.
did you read do you read all of his work, by the way?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. What was that one? It's called like Elevation, I think it's called.
Oh yeah, Elevation the short. It was I think it was an ebook or something.
Yeah. I that book is so weird, and I was like, I think somebody can make something out of this, and it wouldn't be a typical Stephen King movie by any means.
Maybe an animated movie.
Something like that, it would work. It would work.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's a movie there. I think it's like a kind of a cool, interesting story.
Yeah, yeah.
And he has another one that I had heard that you had been working on, and it's the one with the guy who it's a lot like Thinner, and he has a tumor, and he has to basically give it to people he dislikes. He's like, put it onto somebody
You're
else.
talking about Fair Extension, which
Yes, Fair Extension
is the story we're working on the series.
Oh, is it?
Now we've basically made a deal with a network, and now we have to see if we can close the terms.
Oh, I would love to see that.
It's now it's a secret, but it's now called Stephen King's Lucky.
Oh, all right.
I said it in Las Vegas.
I like that.
So when you've got Stephen King's name attached to Lucky, it changes the meaning of the word.
Sure.
What's scarier, clown dolls or ventriloquist dummies?
Well, ventriloquist dummies can talk.
Oh yeah.
So I would have to say them.
Yeah, and they have like the eyes, so you could just were those eyes looking at me before?
Exactly. Yeah. You've got everything. Plus the scary dummy goes back to The Great Gabbo in 1929, one of the early talkie movies with Erich von Stroheim as the ventriloquist. So, well, okay, there's a little academia coming out.
Yeah.
There it is.
What's one horror movie that shouldn't be remade? One that should be untouchable, if there is any.
All of them.
Oh, against the remake.
If there were never another remake, I'd be a happy man, a happy audience member. Even though we did The Shining, it's not a remake. It was doing the book, and the script was written by the author of the book. So he's the one who wanted to do that version. So if a story is being worth told once, tell it once to the best of your ability and move on.
Yeah. Yeah, I always get into that kind of area with the remakes where remaking a movie and you make it scene for scene seems insane.
Yeah.
But when there's this source material you have and you can
change things
tell
up.
a different story almost with the story, I tend to side with those a little bit more. But
plus, if a movie is a classic, then
I mean,
if you remake it, it's gonna suck, or it's not going to be as good as the original. So if you're gonna remake something that could be made better.
Yeah. Joe, you're up.
Didn't I just ask that one? But I'll go again. What's the best Stephen King work?
There are a bunch of great ones. The Dead Zone is great. Misery is great. The Shining is great. It's a great Kubrick film if it's not a great King adaptation. Stand By Me is one of the best. There are so many good ones. Flanagan has done great work on his Dr. Sleep and the television things. And, I love Gerald's Game.
That was great.
And it's something I wanted to make for a long time, but was glad it ended up in the hands of Flanagan if it wasn't going to be me.
Yeah.
So there is just a huge pile of great King adaptations.
It's funny. I remember when Mike started doing those Stephen King stuff, and I was like, is this guy trying to take Mick's spot? I was a little bit upset.
We're good friends, and I have nothing but respect for Mike. I
feel a lot better.
I think he is one of the most talented guys out there.
He's making some amazing
Everything
work.
he does is terrific. And Midnight Mass is spectacular.
So good. So
that
good.
scene in the church when the vampire lurches at him is one of the best modern horror moments, in my opinion.
I agree with you. It's so good. Everything. It could only have been made by an angry lapsed Catholic. I just love it.
We make the best content. Wait, I wanted to bring something up with the zombie vampires werewolves. Have you seen Mads?
I have. I saw it at a festival overseas. I saw it in Spain. It's amazing.
I loved it. So much.
I wonder how they made it and how much of it was digitally done, because, the conceit is that it's all one shot.
Right.
And I don't know how they made that movie. It's freaking incredible.
It's
awesome.
And
that's on Shudder. So that can be seen on Shudder.
So from what I understand, because there's not a lot of information about it, I was trying to dig into it after I watched it because I was like, this is nuts. The only thing I could find was a secondhand retelling of an interview that he did. Because I think he's French.
Yeah, it's made in France.
Yeah. They shot it in 5 days. And each day they just shot the movie in whole. And then they just chose the best cut.
And then they digitally would morph the scene so it looks like, something would pass the camera and then
they didn't do that. Supposedly they just took the best one out of the 5. They ran through the whole thing in a day. Next day they did the same. They made the movie.
You can tell there are transitions.
Can you? Okay. There was only one scene I could find.
There is a list of digital effects artists in the end credits that's really long.
That makes more sense. Okay. Yeah. That makes more sense. So, because I was like, there's no way it could
possibly have been done in one shot, but it's very convincing.
I couldn't find it.
It's mind-blowingly effective.
I couldn't find it. And yeah, it was so I couldn't find it. There was one shot where there's a bush, and that was finally where I was like, that had to be it, because it was just the bush. And I was like,
there are a few of those, and some of them are digital effects that are very sophisticated.
Yeah.
Because I'd love to be proven wrong, but I cannot imagine it would be in any planet possible to shoot that with no cuts.
I couldn't imagine it. And again, I'm just,
it goes into houses and out of houses and onto motorcycles and off of motorcycles and into cars and out of cars and into another house and into another location. And
it was nuts.
It's mind blowing. But however it's done, it's a masterpiece.
It really is. And presenting that type of movie in that way caused this like insane dread the whole time. And I was like, this is probably the way it needs to be shot. And the only thing I could think about was that movie 1917, that war movie.
Also great. A great film.
And I was like, well, it causes the same thing. And it's like this idea of like being trapped, but on the run and chaos, right? Just chaos. And I was like, that's how you have to shoot that.
And also in the end titles, really long digital effects credits.
That's interesting. I'm going to keep my eye
really
out for that.
Good. Yeah.
Yeah. That was amazing. Okay. Sorry. So that was my random tangent. Last rapid fire. What is the non-horror movie that you love and watch on repeat?
Oh, let's see. LA Confidential.
Oh,
Good choice. Good choice.
that's a good choice. I like that. I was
Yeah,
not expecting that.
I love
No rom-coms.
No, not big on the rom-coms. I do like a good comedy, you know.
Yeah.
I'm not above any of the, you know, any R-rated comedies, you know. PG-13 I can leave behind.
You were an associate producer on the Cheeseball Presents.
I was. I helped get some people involved and did some work on that. But the more unlikely credit I have is that I'm executive producer on Unbroken, the movie directed by Angelina Jolie.
How did that come about?
Because it's about my father-in-law, my wife Cynthia's father, who was an Olympic runner in 1936 in Berlin and was in a bomber in World War II that crashed in the Pacific, killing everybody but 3 guys. He was in a life raft for 47 days before being picked up by the Japanese and interred for 2.5 years. Became one of the most tortured men of World War II. And I managed to bring that to my agency at the time, CAA and Universal, and get it to Angelina, who read the book and just flipped over it and wanted to make it into a movie. It's a great movie.
Wow. Whoa. That's
Shit.
fantastic.
So people see that movie and go, how the fuck did Mick Garris's name?
That's amazing.
It's incredible.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, Joe, do you have any other questions? Any other topics?
No, I just thank you for taking the time to talk to us.
A pleasure, guys.
Yeah, yeah. And oh wait, you know what? I do have one more question because we did cover Quicksilver Highway. And how did you choose the 2 stories for that? Like, how did that come about? Did you go to them and be like, I have these 2 stories I want to make? Or how does that happen?
I first got one story from King, and it was going to be a pilot, a pilot for Fox. And then they decided they wanted to make it into a TV movie. So I needed another story because I wanted it to be an anthology series about this character who goes across the country and stopping in cities across the country where there would be a story to be told featuring characters in that city. So when they said they wanted it to be a movie, I'd already gotten one story from King and had adapted it myself. I went to Clive Barker and said, we're doing this. Can I get a story from you? And then we got the rights to his story. And then I wrote that script as well. And then it turns out that the TV movies department at Fox didn't exist at that time. They didn't make TV movies at all. So the series people who were supposed to be seeing that TV movie as a backdoor pilot never saw the TV movie at all. So it never became a pilot. But John McTiernan and his wife at the time were the executive producers on it. And then I was the writer, producer, director.
Oh, all right. Oh, that's cool.
So there's the story in a nutshell.
And then it came out great. I mean, I think it's a cool blend to put those 2 together. Yeah.
I had just finished making The Shining out of town and thought it'd really be fun to get that group back together and just do something that's a lot lower stress than The Shining was. And I called it a recreational horror film that we all just got together and had a good time making it. And it was very low stress for the most part. And shooting in LA was something that I hadn't done in a long time and was ready to do it.
It must have been nice.
Go home to my own bed, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I really liked the idea of taking the actors from the narrative part and plugging
the
them
wraparounds.
into yeah. I thought that was really cool.
Thanks.
Yeah. And so with that, we're going to wrap it up, but we need the Mick pick for next week. You could be a movie that you made from your catalog or something you just want people to see. And
I want people to see a Spanish movie called The Coffee Table.
Okay.
And don't look into what it's about. Don't know anything about it before you see it. It's on demand. You can rent it. But it's the Spanish title is La Casita del Comedor. but it is called The Coffee Table, and it's very intense. It is very dark, but also very darkly funny. And I'm a huge fan of this. I turned Stephen King onto it. He posted about it on Twitter and changed the life of the Spanish filmmaker who made it for next to nothing.
Awesome. So that's what we'll do next week.
Click.
That's a mixed pick. Right. Well, that's what we're gonna do to end March Garris. Mick, thank you so much for joining us. I had so much fun.
A pleasure.
This was awesome.
And hopefully we can have you on again when hopefully your next project comes around.
Here's hoping. We've got a couple of them on the verge.
That's awesome.
But there's always a couple on the verge, so who knows? All right, guys. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Always a pleasure. Take care.
I like my voyeurism with a glass of red rum, 'cause I'm a gorehound, hellbound, horror movie lover. Good and evil are just colors on the spectrum, 'cause I'm a gorehound, hellbound, horror movie lover. I like my voyeurism with a glass of red rum, 'cause I'm a gorehound, hellbound, horror movie lover. Good and evil are just colors on the spectrum.